Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi guys, welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. I'm really excited about our topic. We're going to be talking about teenage mental health with our sons and how to promote healthy mental health with our teenage boys. And I think this is such an important topic. So we have a coach, Matt Findora, and he's going to talk to us about his perspective on male mental health. With that, let's get to Matt.
I'm glad to be here. Really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about male teenage mental health, which is such a huge topic. We have a huge need for support in this area. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started. What kind of led you down this path of supporting males in mental health?
So my story started when I was a senior in high school. I grew up in this victim, negative, poor atmosphere, very secluded. It was just, my parents wouldn't really let me get involved with friends or have outside sources of family to talk to or anything. So one day, because we were so poor and I'm trying to go to college, my older brother had to pay for me to take my ACT. And so he paid for it. We got the times wrong. I showed up late and they wouldn't let me take my ACT. So about a week after that, I was in lunch and somebody approached me because they saw I was wearing this Marine's backpack. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever considered joining?" I was like, "No, I just wanted this bag for free. I don't want to carry my books around everywhere." He's like, "Well, hey, we're going to go work out this afternoon and we'll come pick you up and everything." And I thought about it for a minute. I was like, you know what? I have this gym in my apartment. I don't know how to use any of the equipment. So sure, why not? Yeah. So I went home, ate a snack like I do every single day. They came pick me up. We drove past the gym to the park. This was at the height of P90X. And so we were doing a P90X circuit course in the park on a nice hot day. And this is the first workout I've ever done in my life, basically. Mm-hmm. So naturally, right before the final exercise, I threw up all the food I had just eaten. And the person who was leading this exercise was someone who had recently graduated from boot camp. He's like, "It's all right. Take it easy. No big deal. You feel weak and tired. It's okay." The guy who invited me was in the same group. He's like, "What are you doing? Push yourself. Let's go." And so in this moment, I was like, man, I definitely feel tired and weak. And he's kind of giving me the okay to not keep going. But at the same time, I came here with a purpose. I came here for a reason. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to push myself. So I pushed myself through it. I didn't do a lot, but what it showed me was I'm much more capable than what anybody else tells me that I am. And so a little after that, I decided, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. And so I ended up serving in the Marine Corps. Did 10.5 years. And so my journey of the motivation just kind of continued going on with that. I started with just motivational quotes on Facebook. I had somebody in person and somebody via Facebook message me, say, "Hey, this really inspired me." And I was like, wow, I didn't know I could do that. So then it kind of just progressed from there. I started a blog, started getting a little bit more serious about, writing. I then had a technical error and basically deleted the whole website and everything that I had going for myself. So I had to stop that. But in 2019, I watched this documentary called "I'm Not Your Guru" by Tony Robbins on Netflix. And I was like, that is the type of impact I wish I can make like that. I want to bring that into the world. And so I started pursuing being a life coach. I got out of the military in 2021. And soon after that, I just focused on what it was I wanted to do. And what I realized was all the blogs and everything that I had been doing was all around the mindset. And so how do we make these mindset shifts? How do we make the perspective shifts and create that ideal life that we want? So thinking about all the things that happened to me as a kid, I was like, I want to focus on young men because if it weren't for that one moment in my life, I have no idea where I would be today. Mm-hmm. And as I continue growing, especially outside of the military, I realized how important it is as a man to just take care of yourself and kind of work through problems without the influence and the outside noise telling us who we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. This is so interesting. And I think, as a woman, as a therapist, I feel like I understand male mental health to a certain extent. Obviously, I am not male, so I don't get it completely because I've never lived it, but I'm also raising boys and I'm married and I grew up in a household that had boys too. But I was listening to something and it struck me because they said, as boys, you guys are socialized to like, if something negative happens, to kind of fight back. Like, don't take that, fight back. And it's like, okay, yeah. And then then you do that instead of like, cause you don't want people to call you names or think you're weak. And so then you're going to like fight back against that, other kid or situation or whatever. And then you grow up to be an adult. And then your only skill that you developed around emotions was anger and fighting. And then they're like, oh no, you can't do that. Don't do that. You're not allowed to fight. Like, you're going to go to jail. Like, that doesn't work. And I was like, oh my gosh, holy smokes, this is crazy. Like, we can't tell people their skill is fight back and then take it away. Right. So I think this has become kind of a passion of mine because I want to shift the narrative. I don't want this to keep being this way for everybody, but especially males. And I think that concept, I mean, have you experienced that in your life of like, being told that and then being told something different in terms of like how you handle emotions, like as you age?
Absolutely. So, and I mean, in every aspect, I mean, a great way of phrasing that. As men, we're told like the two feelings we're allowed to be are happy and angry, right?
Yeah.
We're not allowed to be afraid, and we're not allowed to feel sad. And those are two important emotions that we have to feel in order to move forward in life. You have to acknowledge those things and move forward. And that's how you actually reach the happiness that you actually want in life, is going through that transition process of, why am I sad? Why am I afraid? I can use this as an example. Growing up, that mindset came from my dad. And unfortunately, he definitely has those narcissistic behaviors in him. And so we were taught, you never ask for help. Like, your last name is enough for you. And I quickly realized that's not the case. Like, your name means nothing outside of your own household, right? It's what you make of yourself. And so I would go through school. I would only raise my hand if I absolutely knew the answer.
Mhm.
And if I had a question, I'm not going to point out in front of everybody, hey, I don't know the answer to this, because that would make me feel weak. Or asking for help, asking for support would make me feel weak, which is also a huge problem. We don't ask for help. We view it as a weakness instead of a strength. So absolutely, like, we're told to fit in this mold. And then we're told, this is your mold, this is your identity. And then later on you realize, wait, I'm more than that. Or if there is that pushback, now you're like, well, who am I then?
Mm-hmm. It gets really confusing. Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion around male mental health. What other things do you think get in the way or are contributing to what struggles we're having in male mental health right now?
So the two biggest factors in male mental health are loneliness and worthiness.
Mm.
And so the loneliness aspect, almost kind of what I said, is we don't ask for help. We think that we're alone. We think that whatever the struggle is, no one's going to understand us. Or if I sit here and say, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I don't feel good, like, this isn't going to work out, we're going to be felt as vulnerable, unsafe, weak, whatever that is. And so we try to keep up this persona, especially as a father, right? I'm married, I have kids, and you want everybody else to see you as this pillar, but you can't always be the pillar. Sometimes the pillar has to rest, right? It needs a break every once in a while. And so we have to find support groups, right? Whatever that is. That doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I'm going to go to group therapy or group coaching, but just have friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have people who will actually be that safe space for you to sit there and talk about your emotions, and for you to be vulnerable, say, hey, I'm not doing okay, because at the end of the day, it's okay to not be okay. And we kind of need to go through that process of reminding ourselves that that's okay. And then when it comes to that worthiness as the second one, men view achievements as their worth. And so they go through, what did I accomplish today? Like, oh, I didn't do anything. Man, I'm lazy. And so you start feeling down upon you frown upon yourself. You push yourself down because you didn't accomplish anything. You think your titles, you think your identity is based around those achievements and those titles that you have. And again, that's not the case. You're worthy no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think, the solution to feeling worthy, or I mean, not one of the solutions to feeling worthy and also to feel connected, is asking for help, right? Because somebody else might know how to solve this problem so much faster. And I know that, like, when I'm in a grocery store and it's like a store I've not been to, or it's like new or whatever. And then I'm like trying to find the thing. It's like I can spend 30 minutes walking around the store to get my bearings or just ask. And I'm always like,
Mhm.
when I ask, I'm like, oh, wow, that was easy, right? Like that was so much better. But, we have a lot of fear associated around that. But it's like the more we do it and see that it works out, the better we feel about it. And that we actually don't lose our accomplishment by asking for help. We actually, part of it being part of something that we have accomplished, even if there's a team beside us, that actually feels better. It makes us feel like we're a part of something that matters. But sometimes I can imagine how that like loneliness, like isolating yourself from other people because you don't want to ask for help, then it's like, what's the point of these relationships?
Mhm.
It would be kind of confusing, I can imagine. So I think on this zone, we hear a lot of buzz around toxic masculinity. What is that? And how do we help fight against it as parents?
It's funny because I started actually really digging into this because I had a concept, I had an idea of what it was. But when you actually look up and actually like truly understand what toxic masculinity is, it's kind of been it's like when you like text what's happened to it is like when you text somebody and like you don't know how you're going to take it and you take it a certain way, but because it's text you have no idea how they're actually meaning it. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what we've done with toxic masculinity. It was used in a study to describe a certain type of behavior, and because people read it a certain way, they've taken it and they've almost politicized it more than what it actually originally meant. And so people view toxic masculinity as masculine aggression and entitlement. But my devil's advocate to that would be, if those same traits were in a woman, would we call it toxic femininity?
Sure.
So,
No, I mean, yes, yeah, it's different, but yes, yeah.
so I think that people have toxic behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing on a podcast that 1 in 4 people have narcissistic behavior. I haven't found the study that proves that. It shows about 5% of in the US people have narcissistic behavior, which is a toxic trait, not necessarily toward just men. It's both towards men and women. So what people are viewing toxic masculinity is that you have to be aggressive. You have to, like the man is in charge and nobody's allowed to disrespect the man.
Mm-hmm.
And so people kind of take that as I have to, what this alpha is supposed to be. And again, it comes back to that original thing of this cookie cutter mold that we made where you're only allowed to feel happy and angry. And so that's kind of become what the societal image is of men. How do we work through that? Is by talking about our emotions and sitting
Mm-hmm.
there being vulnerable and finding that safe space, finding that person that you could talk to and say like, hey, I'm not okay today. And the way we're actually going to get through it is as parents modeling it for our kids.
Yeah.
We say on the flight attendant says you put on your own face mask before you put it on others. We have to show other people what it's like to grow before we ask them to grow, because we're saying, hey, do as I say, not as I do. So it
Mm-hmm.
starts with a parent, and then that will trickle down to the child, because especially when they're young and they're so gullible and like how their brain is creating their identity. They're creating their identity based around their parent. If the parent is emotional in the sense of aware of what they're feeling and they can process those things, and while they're doing that, teach their child is going to be able to process their emotions and not have those toxic behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the hardest part about being a parent is there's a lot of expectations on us, right, to model things, but it's also lovely, right? So if we're figuring it out, like we don't have to have everything together because we don't. That's the truth, right? Like we are all humans in the process of growing too. And so if we are figuring out how to process our emotions, or we're already good at that, depending on where you are in that spectrum, and our kid sees us, then they're going to model how we're doing it, even if we don't have a conversation. But I think the conversation piece really solidifies, like, especially if you mess up, like, hey, I handled that like this. And that's not something I'm super proud of. Like, I wish I would have done this. Next time I'm going to work to that. Can you forgive me for that? Can you, yeah, right? How are you feeling about this? Like, anything that you want to talk about? And I think, our kids, I give this example on the podcast quite a bit, but because it was so impactful for me. So I have 4 kids and the youngest is 2. And my husband has a certain way that he gets ready in the morning. And then, I mean, I think we all do, but he is very like regimented. Like it's just like a very consistent schedule of like which things he does in what order. And I think it's so he doesn't forget to do this stuff. But anyway, so my 2-year-old got out of the shower one night and he was doing the exact same routine that my husband does. Like it's not his routine, but it was my husband's routine because he had modeled it so many times that then my son's thinking, this is how you do that. Well, that's not a problem because this routine doesn't really matter, right? Like if my son takes that routine, great, doesn't, fine. But when it's about feelings, right? And if we're modeling, we get angry or we're really irritable, then maybe that's what we're modeling for kids. I mean, we definitely are. And I read something once that said, if your kid has a harsh start, maybe you also have a harsh start, right? Like to just be aware of if our kids are doing something that we're not really loving and how they're handling it may be different, like a different situation, but to look at their behavior and think, is there some of me in that? And that is a
Absolutely.
hard realization sometimes.
Yeah. Kids are the best source of self-awareness when you
Yes.
actually pay attention to them and you actually think, oh, where did they learn that from? And they're like, ooh, I'm the one who taught them that. Maybe I need to kind of dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, to get reflective and it can be really hard. And I think, so back to the toxic masculinity part, I think, the piece for me is anytime we're too much of anything, that's too much, right? Like we eat too much sugar, we work out too much, or we only are focused on our phones or whatever the thing is, all of those things are fine, right? Like having something sweet, great. Being on your phone, okay. Right? Like there are things that we need to do. Working out, that's great for your body, right? But anything that is too much, right? It's not in balance of understanding other people's feelings or understanding how our behaviors impact other people or demanding something of people without giving them a voice. I mean, like, I think that's for me, the toxic part of amplifying this thing of demanding something when it could be in balance. Like sometimes we might have needs, sometimes we give and balancing that piece. So maybe that's the part. And so I think talking about it with our kids, like if you notice something or if they're emulating that toxic masculinity or just that demanding behavior, it's like look reflecting on our own behaviors or maybe like talking to them, if they're a teenager and they're on social media, like talking about like what channels are you really into or like who are you watching? Like what's on your reel? Can we sit down and do this together to kind of help see what they're also taking in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be hard. Okay, so how do we encourage our teenage boys to talk to us about their emotions, their experiences, their concerns? How do we open this dialogue?
Again, it comes down to the parents and modeling, and I think especially for the father aspect of things, because if as a man you're told from society, from everybody around you, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be angry, happy, this pillar, when they actually see their father get emotional or be vulnerable and to say, hey, like, like just sitting down, like what maybe that's journaling together or just sitting down talking, hey, how was your day? Going for a walk, just you and the child. How was your day? But asking more deep questions. So that would be something like, hey, what good happened in your day today? What was your favorite part of the day? And then reverse that too. Like, what was the hardest part about today? Did you face any challenges? Were you afraid at any point? Oh, and then answering that question yourself too. So it's not just an interrogation, but it's a conversation of, man, I tried this thing and it was really, really hard for me. But you know what? I'm going to try again. I think
Mhm.
it's having the safe space, the conversations, modeling as a father, and seeing that vulnerability. I know growing up, I never saw my dad cry, not a single time, and it's because when he did, it was very, very private. I remember my mom even said she only saw it happen one time, and that's a huge problem if we're not even crying because you have to cry, you have to let out that emotion, and if you just
Mhm.
hold all that in, that's when it builds up into the anger, and then it just explodes in very toxic behaviors.
Yeah. And it's uncomfortable. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, crying is uncomfortable, but I just think socially, we are in a place where society accepts women crying and does not seem to accept men, but we're all humans. And so
Mhm.
being able to have those feelings, talk about those feelings, experience the feelings actually lets them out. I know that for me, I don't like crying because I mean, it just feels uncomfortable. But every time I do, when I get to the place where it's like that emotion is bubbling up in me, when I let it out, I'm like, oh, even that just feels better, even though I haven't solved anything. But that release of emotion actually feels better. So I would
Hmm.
encourage people to give it a try. Like, let it just come out if it's coming out, right? Like, how do you coach people to like allow themselves to cry if that's not something they are comfortable with?
Just have them get in the moment and identify the emotion. I think
Mhm.
once you identify the emotion and you say it out loud, this is how I feel, your body now has to take action on that. Because otherwise, we're just saying in our head, oh, I feel really sad. But when you're actually saying, like, oh, when you say it out loud, I feel overwhelmed, you now have to acknowledge the fact that you really do feel overwhelmed and
Mhm.
and you have to process that emotion now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it just happens naturally. I mean, we can hold it back, but it's like it once you get used to doing it, doesn't mean you're going to do it all the time. I definitely don't cry all the time, but there are definitely moments where that has been really helpful in allowing myself to experience that, where I can be sad without crying. I mean, I can be, happy. And sometimes I'm crying because I'm so happy or I'm laughing at something. I remember when I was pregnant with one of our kids, I was watching or was looking at all these different pictures of like newborn photo shoots. And there was one where this like newborn is like having a bowel movement all over the dad in the picture. And I am like dying laughing so much that my husband wakes up and he's like, what is going on? And I was like crying because I was laughing so hard. So I think just allowing ourselves to feel those emotions is important. Um, and opening the door, right? Like, so we do it, but then we're opening the door to conversation. And I think, something that helps me with conversations, like in my practice, like, cause sometimes, I mean, people don't want to sit down and just like tell all the things, right? Like you sometimes have to, um, provide the right setting, the right question to get to the information that you're looking for to like get that out. Even if they want to tell you, sometimes they're waiting for you to ask that question. So I love conversation cards. There's a million different kinds online, but like that could be something cool for a dad to have conversation cards like in their car. And then they're like, hey, grab a card, right? Or at dinner to like have those conversation cards to facilitate the conversation and all of the people are participating just as much as anybody else. No one's, focusing more. It's not just a girl thing that we do. It's like everybody does it to promote conversation and that creates connection and then connection creates safety and then the safety creates the opportunity for feelings to come out.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. So what do you think parents need to do or be on the lookout for in terms of concerning behavior? So like, when should we be our alarm bells start going off or our spidey sense that like something might not be okay with our teen?
I think it's when they start. I mean, if there's any major behavioral changes, I think that's the concern to have that conversation. Like, hey, what's going on? I see you're acting this way, and you don't normally do that. What's going on? Like, and trying to
Hmm.
ask those deeper and not not asking the basic question of how are you feeling? Are you
Hmm.
okay? But
Hmm.
actually getting deep, like, is there something wrong? Like, are you hurting? What, like something to that effect. But when they start removing themselves from the things that they love, whether that's the dinner table or, hey, there's this activity that they really enjoy, they're not doing it as much anymore. I think that's when you really have to pay attention of, okay, there's something going on that isn't being spoken about, but we need to get to the bottom of that. One of kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, the loneliness aspect of things, a lot of that loneliness happens in relationships.
Hmm.
And because you may be in a relationship, but still feel lonely in that relationship because your needs aren't getting met. And so I think the statistics says that 79 to 80% of suicides are men. And a lot of that comes from loneliness. And that loneliness comes from the toxic relationships that they have that they don't see that they're involved in. They see, hey, I'm a man, I'm taking care of my significant other, I'm taking care of my partner, and they're feeling a certain way. Why are they feeling this way? Like I'm doing everything that I can. And you start taking those things personally. When you have some type of relationship like that, you have to be aware, they have to learn to be aware of what's happening in the relationship. So is this person acting this way? Why are they acting that way? What am I doing? But what are they doing? Not taking everything as I have to solve everyone's problems. Sometimes women talk to vent, not for you to solve their problems. And that's a very difficult thing for a man to handle, especially when you're younger, because your prefrontal cortex doesn't develop till you're 25. So you see that as what, like as a personal attack. Why aren't you happy? What's going on? What am I doing wrong? And so that's why that's such a critical age of taking care of yourself and learning what's right and wrong in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's key because I think something we don't do well as a society for teenagers is to talk about what healthy relationships look like. Like, what is a healthy relationship before you're even in it, right? Like, that's something where it's like we're giving body education, but we're not talking about relationships. And a lot of times I know that teens don't know what they're looking for. And of course, because we're growing, but they haven't had that conversation, or maybe the relationships that they see around them are not maybe healthy relationships. So then that's what they expect. They think that that is what healthy looks like because they don't know any different. And then there's no conversations around that, right? And then they found themselves in those same relationships and they're like, I'm totally in the relationship my parents were in as adults, but that wasn't a healthy or happy relationship. And then they feel kind of trapped, right? Of not talking about their needs, not being willing to be vulnerable because they've been told, don't do that, right? Like, and so they isolate themselves. They're lonely totally within those relationships. So I think a cool thing that parents could do is talking about or asking their teen, like, what do you think a healthy relationship looks like? Like, what have you seen? Who have you seen modeling a healthy relationship or that you're kind of using as a guide? And it might be, they might say, oh, I'm using my older brothers. And you're like, oh gosh, okay, well, that's that, right. Like, or you're like, yeah, actually that's great. Or whatever, or like, what do you like about that? And so I think it's getting curious about what they see, what they're trying to emulate. I once was told by, one of my family members, she was talking about healthy relationships, and she had been in a relationship, and she was talking to my husband and I about something, and she was like, how many times has your husband hit you? And I was like, never. And she's like, what? And I was like, never. And she was like, well, when have you been afraid? And I was like, never. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, that's not how a healthy relationship should be. We shouldn't be in fear of our partners. And I think, even that, it was shocking to me that they had not been exposed to healthy enough relationships to know that that actually was not a healthy behavior. So I think we actually have to talk about it. We can't just expect that they're observing the world and coming away with healthy concepts of what this is.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things that men need in relationships, or they feel like they need, is respect. And you can get respect two ways: love and fear. And so if you're showing love and that there's that love connection, that's when you have that healthy relationship. If it's fear, that's when you start getting into that toxic behavior that we were just talking about that you want to avoid. I think one of the most important things that I learned in relationships was understanding the five love languages, one of the best books that's out there when it comes to relationships, and understanding A, what are you? And B, what is your partner? Usually they're going to be the exact opposite for whatever reason, the exact opposite. And so that's something, if you're aware of that, you can make sure that you set boundaries around that, making sure. So if your love language is words of affirmation, and you're making sure your partner understands that, and then also understands the boundary of, you can't use the words to cut me down like that, because that's something that's important to me, and setting that boundary. Same thing with, let's say it's quality time, is, hey, setting that boundary of, we need to set time for us. Especially as parents, we don't do that enough. And so our kids just see us busy, 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 busy. And they also need to see that model behavior of parents being together, having that quality time together.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a good point about the fear and love being the ways that you can get respect. Because I think a lot of times we were raised in houses that demonstrated probably more fear, especially from the male parent, right? And then maybe more love or nurturing from the female parent. But you can be a male parent that also shows love. It's totally possible. And it's so nice. It feels way better. And I think you have more impact that way, right? Because the fear is, yes, they're afraid of you, but then you don't really know what's going on and you never really solve the problem. Whereas with love, you're curious and they're going to open up to you and share what's really going on so you can actually solve the problem. So if your kid's coming out of their bedroom a million times and you're using fear, like, you're going to lose this or this bad thing's going to happen because you're doing that, you don't actually solve the problem.
Hmm.
Yeah. So such a good perspective on that. I think that can be hard, but it's good for us to know for our teens too, of like we're modeling that part of things as well. So what do you think society can do better to support males?
I think there's so many different things that just came into my head. So I
Yes.
think again, it starts with the parent modeling that behavior.
Hmm.
I think it's also setting the right standard of what a man should be, and not necessarily, hey, he needs to be this alpha male, he needs to be this dog, doing this, doing that, but rather accepting them for being them, right? And allowing them to be authentically themselves at all times. There shouldn't be that fear of judgment of if I cry in public, like everyone's just going to be looking at me, I'm going to be seen this way. Try to eliminate that fear of judgment and be okay with who you are. I think it starts at a young age, teaching people at a young age what is love and feeling what that is. And that comes through conversations, that comes through writing, that comes through self-expression, self-awareness. And I think a lot of it also it starts in the household, and then when they go to school, it's the same thing. They have to learn. They're now introduced to this new body, this new system, a bunch more people. Not everyone's going to be taught the same thing in the same way, and understanding and realizing and learning about different people and how they behave, and how do we implement that in a school setting, so that way, as they're progressing in both the family aspect and the school system, once they become adults, that process continues.
Hmm. Yeah, so it made me think of while you were talking this book that I read sometimes, and it's called Pink is for Boys. And really the summary of the book is that all colors are for everybody. And I think that's the same way with feelings, right? Same with interests, same with all the things of like being open to this idea that everything can be for everybody, right? Of like, there's no boy things and there's no girl things, that they don't have to be gender assigned, especially emotions, right? And
Mhm.
especially being able to be open with things. I think how our bodies are made, males have an inclination to do certain things, right? And how females' bodies are made have an inclination to do some things. Like, I think there's those things, but then also, I mean, we have women as Navy SEALs now, right? Am I
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we have really strong women and we have really strong men, and we have men who are really artistic and creative and women who are really artistic and creative. And I mean, I think it's that we can embrace both sides. So being authentically ourselves, like allowing space for that, even when it's uncomfortable, especially for the parents, right? Like that's a hard part, is like you may have a dream for your kid to be X, and that may not be their dream, right? And
Mhm.
allowing them to live into their purpose is important, and may not, it may require growing on our side more than it is growing on our kids' side, really.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that our children aren't supposed to be used to fulfill our dreams,
Mhm.
right? Like the things that we didn't do. We're like, oh, you know what? Like you should be grateful for that you have this type of life because I didn't have that. That's not their fault that you lived the life that you lived. You have to allow them to find who they are, find that self-expression. Who are they authentically? What is their identity? They have to figure that out for themselves. And it's our job as a parent to accept that, maybe guide them in the right direction. But we're more of a supportive role than a rigid, this is we're going to put the blinders on you. You're going to be this person, right?
Yeah.
That's not our job.
Yeah. Yeah. More of a supporting role than leading role, right? Yeah. I like that analogy. Okay. So if you could say something to the teenage males out there, what would you want to tell them? What would you want to say to them? What do you think is important?
I'd want to remind them that you are worthy, you matter, and you're loved because unfortunately don't get told that enough. They don't get told, hey, I'm proud of you for this. I love you. I don't have to have a reason for loving you. I love
Mhm.
you. And you matter in this world.
Yeah. Those are great words. What have you learned about yourself in the process of getting to where you are today that you want to share with people?
Don't disassociate yourself from your problems because growing up, I was taught, like, why is everyone so stressed out? Like, just don't, like, you don't have to be stressed out. And what I realized was I was disassociating myself from that stress. I was like, I'll just put that, over there, just not worry about it, right? Just be chill, be cool, whatever, like everything will be fine. And when you do that and you don't acknowledge, the emotions aspect of things, you're not really handling, you're just putting a lid on Pandora's box. And eventually that's going to come out. And when you do that, you're stunting your own growth. We say, don't give coffee to kids because it stunts their growth. Don't put a lid on your kids' emotions because that's going to stunt their growth too. And if you allow that to happen at a younger age, as you'll see, as they grow up and they become a teenager and become adults, they'll be able to handle a lot more, probably a lot more than we did as adults, that we do as parents.
Yeah. And finally, what do you want parents to take away from this conversation? We've downloaded a lot of different things. And so I think, what do you want them to really focus on?
Talk to your kids, be present with them, and, kiss your kids, give them hugs. One thing that I'm doing now that I kind of learned and I can already feel a difference in, past couple of weeks is when you go to hug your child, don't let go first. Because when you don't let go, because we're so busy as adults, we're like, I just got to get on to the next thing, get on to the next thing. If you just stay there with your child, you give them a hug, let them let go first, you're letting them know this is a safe place. Like, I don't have anything else. I don't have anywhere better to be than here in your arms. And I think that really builds your bond with your child.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for being here today. This has been really insightful. I really appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you. I'm glad I got to share this.
Thanks again, Matt. That was all really helpful information. I don't know about you, but there was a lot of things that Matt said that are sticking with me, and I kind of want to take away from this conversation. But I was thinking about how important it is to create that safe space for connection and to be able to open up, right? And if we're not creating the opportunity, it's probably not going to happen. And also that we're modeling how we want our kids, or the best way for us to share our emotions, by using words and talking about how our body feels and noticing those emotions, and that we're being a good guide on how to do that, whether it's for our daughters or our sons or our kids' friends, right? That we're modeling those emotions so that they can see a good example of how to handle those hard feelings and the good feelings. And finally, I love this idea of never letting go of a hug first, whether it's with your 2-year-old, your little kids, or your teen, that you are letting them set the pace to know that they're really important. I love this idea. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and also keep the emails coming. We're loving them with your ideas for shows to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.